In a packed congressional hearing room thick with tension and humming with anticipation, the air grew heavier as Chief Justice John Roberts prepared to take the witness seat. Flanked by advisors, he was summoned to testify on the judicial ethics reforms that had rattled Washington in recent weeks. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a former public defender turned legislator, known not just for her sharp legal mind but for her unapologetic directness. Some underestimated her. Roberts, it appeared, was about to make that mistake. The hearing began cordially enough. Formalities, introductions, statements. But as the clock ticked and the questioning turn pointed, an unmistakable shift in tone emerged. Crockett, leaning into her mic with a calm confidence, asked the first of a series of legally dense and structurally critical questions about judicial transparency. Her tone was respectful, but precise. Her questions framed in language only someone with a deep command of constitutional law would dare pose. Roberts raised an eyebrow. She wasn't reading from notes. "Chief Justice," she said, "given the court's reliance on Marbury v. Madison to assert judicial review, and the absence of a codified code of ethics binding upon the court itself, do you not find it a dangerous inconsistency in a constitutional democracy?" Roberts offered a courteous chuckle, perhaps expecting a softball follow-up, and leaned forward with the air of a professor correcting a student. "Congresswoman, while I appreciate your concern, I must remind you that the judiciary operates with a unique independence not subject to the same oversight mechanisms as the legislative branch." Crockett didn't flinch. She smiled slightly, then responded, not with opinion, but with precedent. "Respectfully, Chief Justice," she said, in 1925, in Federal Trade Commission v. Gratz, the court held that even administrative agencies must adhere to transparent standards. "Are you suggesting that the highest court in the land should be exempt from the basic ethical frameworks we impose on lesser bodies? Because if so, that seems less like independence and more like unaccountable supremacy." A low murmur swept through the room. Roberts blinked. He adjusted his tie. The courtroom-savvy Congresswoman was not here to grandstand. She was here to litigate. He attempted to pivot. "Again, Congresswoman, I don't believe it's appropriate to compare the Supreme Court to regulatory bodies or lower courts. We must protect the sanctity and impartiality of the judiciary." Crockett's reply was immediate, and her words sliced like a seasoned litigator dismantling a weak motion. "I agree that impartiality is sacred. Which is why the appearance of impropriety is corrosive. If a lower court judge accepted lavish gifts or had undisclosed relationships with parties before the bench, they'd be disbarred or impeached. Yet some justices, under your leadership, have faced no consequences. How do you reconcile that?" There was a pause. Not awkward, just long enough to feel the weight of her words. Roberts, now more defensive, leaned forward. "I believe, Congresswoman, that you may be conflating public perception with judicial misconduct. The court's integrity is not measured by opinion polls or media narratives." Crockett pounced, her voice firm but composed. "I'm not measuring by polls, Mr. Chief Justice. I'm measuring by law. Canon 4 of the Code of Conduct for United States Judges states that a judge shall avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities. My question isn't whether the justices believe they are ethical. My question is, who holds them accountable when they're not?" Roberts opened his mouth, paused, then said carefully, "Congress has mechanisms, though rarely used, and I trust this body understands the gravity of invoking them." The tension now became a silent duel between two legal minds. Crockett leaned forward. "So let me be clear. You acknowledge that this body, Congress, has oversight powers over the court?" "Yes, within constitutional limits," Roberts replied. "Then let me suggest, Chief Justice," Crockett continued, "that if the court cannot or will not regulate itself, and if its members remain immune from scrutiny while wielding irrevocable power, then it is not independence you're protecting, it's impunity." The audience, press corps, and even a few stunned fellow representatives held their breath. Crockett, the freshman Congresswoman, had just cornered the Chief Justice of the United States into conceding a fundamental truth, that unchecked power, no matter how high the robe, is dangerous. To his credit, Roberts composed himself with judicial poise. But he no longer spoke with the slight condescension he began with. He now addressed her with respect, even a touch of caution. "I appreciate your passion and legal reasoning, Congresswoman Crockett. And I will take these concerns under advisement as we continue internal discussions on ethics." Crockett gave a courteous nod, then delivered the final blow, not with malice, but with the clarity of someone who knew the law was on her side. "I hope you do, Chief Justice. Because the legitimacy of the court doesn't rest in the Constitution alone. It rests in the trust of the people. And trust, once lost, cannot be restored by precedent. Only by action." As the gavel dropped on the hearing, the room broke into quiet applause, not for spectacle, but for a moment when truth met power and did not blink. The headlines would read differently tomorrow. Some would praise, some would protest. But one thing was undeniable. John Roberts had walked in expecting to intimidate a congresswoman. He walked out knowing he had just been cross-examined by a legal genius. Power without accountability is not independence, it is impunity. This single idea pierced through the entire atmosphere of the courtroom-like congressional hearing, wrapping itself around the intense exchange between Chief Justice John Roberts and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. In that moment, it wasn't just a line, it was the thesis of an era, a declaration of the stakes at hand. It exposed a fault line running deep beneath the surface of American democracy, one that many had grown comfortable ignoring. Crockett, however, refused to look away. She gave voice to what millions feel but cannot articulate, that institutions, no matter how sacred, lose legitimacy when they shield themselves from scrutiny under the guise of tradition or autonomy. The very idea that a group of 9 unelected individuals can wield the final word on every major issue. Abortion rights, voting rights, environmental protections, corporate power, without any meaningful accountability, cuts against the democratic principle that no one is above the law. And here was Crockett, not just pointing this out, but holding it up like a mirror for the Chief Justice to see for himself. Her words were more than critique, they were constitutional advocacy wrapped in clarity. When she cited precedents, she didn't do it to show off, she did it to anchor the debate in law, in history, in logic. She reminded everyone that this wasn't about personalities or party politics. It was about systems. Systems that must be transparent to earn trust. Systems that must be accountable to remain legitimate. And when Roberts tried to deflect, to elevate the court above the reach of oversight, Crockett didn't merely challenge him, she dismantled his argument by invoking the very doctrines he had sworn to uphold. Her questions weren't rhetorical. They were precise, rooted in jurisprudence, and impossible to ignore. She didn't come to debate. She came to prosecute an idea, that integrity in public service must be more than presumed, it must be demonstrated. Roberts, a seasoned legal mind himself, knew he was no longer dealing with just another politician. He was facing someone who had spent years navigating courtrooms where lives were on the line, where justice wasn't theoretical but personal. Crockett understood power, not in the abstract but in its most tangible form, the kind that shapes destinies, divides families, and defines futures. She wasn't intimidated by his title or his robes. Because in her world, titles didn't matter, truth did. And the truth was that the Supreme Court had allowed itself to drift into a place where ethical ambiguity was treated as tradition, and elite privilege was mistaken for immunity. She wasn't accusing Roberts personally. She was demanding that he, as the leader of the judiciary, take responsibility for restoring the public's faith in it. What made her keynote moment so powerful wasn't just the substance, it was the delivery. She didn't yell. She didn't grandstand. She dissected. She interrogated. She laid down the law. It was the kind of performance that reminded people why the legal profession, at its best, is not about manipulation but precision. She gave America a civics lesson in real time. She connected dots that most had overlooked. If every other branch of government is expected to answer to the people, then why should the most powerful court in the land operate without a code of ethics? Why should justices be allowed to accept gifts, trips, and undisclosed favors while passing rulings that affect generations? Crockett didn't accuse the court of corruption, she illuminated the gap between public expectation and judicial behavior. That gap, she argued, was not merely a flaw. It was a threat to democracy. And when she declared that trust, once lost, cannot be restored by precedent but only by action, it hit like a verdict. A final ruling on the conversation itself. There was no going back. No clever rebuttal could undo what she had made plain, that the court must evolve, or it will erode. She wasn't asking for power. She was demanding responsibility. And in doing so, she redefined what leadership looks like. Leadership, she showed, isn't about deference, it's about duty. It's about having the courage to speak truth to power, not to embarrass it, but to elevate it. Crockett's exchange with Roberts wasn't just a moment, it was a model. A model for how public servants can use their platforms not to score points, but to defend the Republic. It reminded us that the Constitution isn't self-executing. It needs guardians. And sometimes, those guardians come in unexpected forms. Crockett, with her piercing legal mind and unwavering moral clarity, became a symbol of that guardianship. She didn't just confront a Chief Justice, she confronted the illusion that our highest institutions are beyond question. She reminded everyone listening, inside that chamber and across the country, that democracy is a living, breathing project. One that requires vigilance, courage, and above all, accountability. And in doing so, she delivered not just a speech, but a reckoning.